middle between. Hello. To introduce our high-level panel on trade, we are pleased to welcome the Director for America's Public Policy with Amazon, a presenting platinum sponsor, Eero Ojuro. Please join me in welcoming Eero.
Good morning. Thank you, Eric, for the introduction, and thank you, Susan, and the rest of the Council of the Americas for putting on this great event and for inviting me to be with you today. It's great to be here with so many friends and colleagues from throughout the Americas, including Senator Cassidy, Ministers Ng and Tovar, who are going to be coming up next. They're going to be telling you, I'm sure, all about the challenges and opportunities for trade in the region, but I thought that I would just set the stage a little bit by talking about something that's very important to Amazon, which is how we can help support small businesses and including to export. At Amazon, we're guided by 16 leadership principles. These principles help shape how we do business, how we lead, really how we function at the company. And right at the top of those 16 principles is customer obsession. We pride ourselves on, whether it's through our consumer business or cloud, on empowering our customers. And our customers aren't just end consumers. They're also the millions of small businesses, global small businesses, I should say, sellers, entrepreneurs, developers, authors, and content creators that we work with at Amazon. Over 20 years ago, we made the decision to open our store to third parties, and it's really proved to be a great bet. Today, over 60% of our sales come from third parties, many of which are small businesses. In 2021, our U.S. selling partners sold more than 3.9 billion products and averaged about $200,000 in sales per seller. Importantly, many of these sales come from exports. In fact, Amazon's U.S. sellers exported more than 225 million products in 2021, and international sales by these sellers reached $2 billion that same year. As we've grown across the Americas, we're similarly focused on supporting local small businesses and exports throughout the region. Minister Ng, we were so pleased to have you at our Canada Small Business Impact Report launch last fall, where we announced that more than 41,000 Canadian third-party selling partners sold their products on Amazon's marketplace in 2021. Just last week, we released data on the impact of third-party selling through our Mexico marketplace, which showed that nearly 18,000 Mexican third-party sellers sell on Amazon, which generated more than 57,000 direct and indirect jobs. And most importantly, 99% of them were small businesses. So that is, while we're proud of these numbers, it's a very good track record. We're always looking for new opportunities to bring more small sellers to work with us at Amazon and find ways to support them. And that is why we are working with the US government and other governments across the hemisphere to train tens of thousands of SMBs to help them grow and build their business. For example, we're so excited that we recently launched with the US Department of Commerce, Go Global with Commerce and Amazon. This initiative is helping small businesses across the U.S. to expand globally and increase sales by taking advantage of the department's assistance and resources and Amazon's marketplaces to reach new customers around the world. And looking south, we know there's a growing need and demand for these types of trainings. We know how important e-commerce is to economic development goals around the region, and that's why in Brazil, in Colombia, and Mexico, just to name a few, we've established partnerships with economic development agencies, with local cities, with governors, with secretaries of commerce, and other agencies to try to find sellers who want to sell on Amazon and then provide them the support they need to succeed. We also provide support to women-owned SMBs in Brazil and Mexico through a partnership with the State Department's Academy for Women Entrepreneurs. Through these partnerships, we have learned a lot about what we need to do to support sellers and how we can work with governments on that goal. But we've also heard from sellers about the policy blockers that they face and how government could help them. And so I'd like to share a few of those themes that we hear over and over from those sellers. First of all, without reliable access to the internet, there is no way that small businesses can use online marketplaces to succeed. You have to have access to the internet, obviously. Expanding connectivity to bridge the digital divide should be a top priority for governments. And they can facilitate this by enabling different technologies and diverse communication service providers. Second, we all know small businesses don't have the resources necessary to deal with complex customs procedures and red tape at the border. It really is a true blocker for small businesses who want to export. Governments should make it cheaper, faster, and easier to get your products into other countries. And third, policymakers should create regulatory frameworks that allow for innovation in digital payments, which should promote financial inclusion. This is particularly important in countries where many SMBs and consumers don't have access to traditional banking. One of the reasons why we at Amazon are so excited about the prospects for the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity is because it really presents an opportunity for governments around the region, hopefully to partner with companies who have experience like Amazon, to really work together to break down these barriers and support small businesses and help them export. So thank you for your time today. I look forward to continuing to work with so many of you on the goals that I've outlined, and I'm just really excited to hear your remarks in the next panel.
Well, thank you, Arrow, and thank you again for your and Amazon's very, very generous support. We appreciate it very, very much. In the 40 minutes that we have for our panel, let's get right into it. We have a terrific panel, ladies and gentlemen, for you, including Canadian Trade Minister Mary Ang, Costa Rican Trade Minister Manuel Tovar, as well as the 2021 recipient of our very own Chairman's Award for Leadership in the Americas, Senator Bill Cassidy. And so we welcome all of you to the Council of the Americas. All speaker biographic information is in your conference packets. For our live stream viewers, you can find our biographic information at our website, which is www.as-coa.org. Minister Ang, let's begin our conversation with you, if we can. In Washington, we don't hear that much about USMCA or, of course, CUSMA in Canada, even though it's fundamental, as I think we all agree, to North American competitiveness. Is that because USMCA is working so well?
Well, I guess it's, oh dear, I hope it's not. It's the Deputy Prime Minister, but I think I'm going to have to tell Christia. I will chat with her later.
Didn't like the question.
I'm going to have to text Christia and tell her on her behalf. Hello, Washington. and the Washington conference. I did not plan that, just so you know. As the person who was, chiefly at the negotiating table with America and Mexico, there you go. But CUSMA, USMCA, TMEC in Mexico, it is working. We are the largest trading agreement in the world. We do over $2 trillion of trade a year. It is $3 billion a day. Like, think about that in terms of orders of magnitude. And for an economy and economies as large as Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and the integration of our supply chains and what we have done over the decades of creating even greater integration, simply means that the architecture of USMCA is extremely important to our economies. And now we're at a very important inflection point. And what is that inflection point? It is that we are all committed to fighting climate change and build our economies and build opportunities, jobs for our workers in all three of our countries. And if you take a look at the automobile industry, an automobile crosses over Canada, US, Mexico 7 times before a car is actually assembled. And now we are talking about the world when we are going to be making electric vehicles together. That battery supply chain. Canada is developing a very robust battery supply chain, but it begins with minerals that are in the ground, critical minerals to which Canada has an abundance of, and extracting those in a way that is sustainable, environmentally sustainable, but with high labor standards is what our advantage is. And it's also what requires us through USMCA. And from the extraction of batteries to the battery assembly to then the vehicle is the work that we need to do. And another perfect example of where it shows it is working, Amazon was just here. Well, across the river is their new headquarters. Well, guess what's in the new headquarters? It's a little company, Canadian company called Carbon Cure. And you know what Carbon Cure does? It greens cement. So the green cement that is in that building starts with technology that is about greening cement into a building like that in Amazon, here in Amazon. So you see that our supply chains are so integrated. And often at panels like this, I've used the example of the burger. You know, when you have a burger, can you really tell that it's Canadian or American or Mexican? But because I've used the American burger example a lot, I'm going to use tomato sauce. So, tomato sauce, American tomatoes, onions, and garlic, Canadian carrots, Mexican zucchini, celery, and green peppers. So you can only make a great sauce if you have all the right ingredients. And I think the Canada-United States-American partnership through the USMCA, CUSMA, and TMEC is that partnership and something we need to work very hard on. Of course, there are issues. With a trading partnership like this that is so large, of course there are going to be issues and we need to resolve them. But that's also why we negotiated the dispute settlement mechanism that actually allows our three countries to resolve issues when they come up. And so to answer your question, I think it is working.
North America is a great sauce. That's the headline. In fact, I fully agree. I think that's a great analogy. Let me follow up with that. We have a review in 2026. Obviously, that's an eternity in political terms. But you've mentioned now a very strong push within the USMCA context on the environment. New EVs, new technologies, et cetera. Would you see that? To the extent you can predict the future, but how would you see that coming into the review in 2026? Or better yet, what do you anticipate from the review if we look at it from 2023?
Well, it is 2026, but we are already beginning to think about it. I've had already 2 free trade commissions with the USTR and the Trade Secretary in Mexico. I'll be having my 3rd in July to take stock of how well the agreement is working. So we're going to have to do that work, and we're going to have to do that work with our partners in this trade agreement. But speaking of SMEs, just a moment ago, in Canada, I'm the trade minister, but I'm also the small business minister and the economic development minister. And the reason it goes hand in hand is that Prime Minister Trudeau sort of looked across and said, in Canada, 99% of our businesses are small and medium-sized businesses, and look at where the growth needs to be and in our communities. So the growth of small and medium-sized businesses, I often say, never mind the very long title I have. I'm Canada's Minister for Startup, Scale Up, and accessing new markets. It's about helping those businesses. And if you look at the chapter that is the SME chapter that we negotiated in this new, in NAFTA 2.0, there is a very robust chapter on SMEs, and it is about being able to create the right conditions for businesses, our small and medium-sized businesses, women-led businesses, Indigenous businesses, Black-owned businesses, those that have traditionally been underrepresented in our economies, to not only grow in our countries respectively, but to actually get into value chains and supply chains as the dependable partners and trading partners that we are. So the work continues, and I'm looking forward to continuing to this work. As I said, it's an over $2 trillion trade. It is a large, it's a large trading pact, and today in the world where rules-based international trading order means a lot, economic resilience and how and who we trade with means a lot. This is an agreement that we must continue to nurture. It is like growing flowers, right? I mean, the seeds have been planted over time, and you've got to keep taking the weeds out from time to time, but the flowers must grow. Yeah,
that's terrific. Thank you very much. I want to come back to you later in terms of Canada's broader trade ambitions, but let's bring in Minister Tovar from Costa Rica. Minister, we're on the topic of trade agreements right now, always a popular topic in Washington, of course. Costa Rica is part of the CAFTA-DR trade agreement. Almost 20 years ago now, precedes USMCA. Some people might say that the CAFTA-DR has underperformed, and I wonder if you could share with us some of your thoughts about how the CAFTA-DR could be an agreement that works better for the countries of the region.
Such a pleasure to be here today, Eric, with good friends of mine, good friends of Costa Rica, partners and allies. And certainly, For us, it's been 20 years of CAFTA. For Costa Rica, we joined a little bit later. We had to go through a referendum, but we finally made it. CAFTA certainly has brought many benefits to Costa Rica's economy. If you look back to the times when it entered into force up to today, our GDP has doubled. That's quite remarkable. And certainly CAFTA has been hugely responsible for that. But certainly we do have challenges. I mean, we do face regional challenges when it comes to institutional frameworks, respect for the rule of law, respect for human rights and institutions. So while the CAFTA partners don't take care of those challenges, we will continue seeing, CAFTA's performance, lower to the expectations that were pursued from the very beginning. For Costa Rica, we have benefited quite a lot from CAFTA. As I said, our GDP has doubled from that time. It has spurred important investment into Costa Rica. This has, continued transforming our economy. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, we were exporting plantain chips. Today, we export microchips, and that has, that evidences that Costa Rica has embraced a profound transformation of our economy. And of course, also, it has provided us some legal certainty. Moving from CBI into a consolidated framework of rules-based system, that has always also been a huge benefit for us. But yes, it's been 7 years since the last meetings of the governing bodies of CAFTA have met. 7 years without updating, without deepening, without modernizing this. We don't see, given the political situation in the region with some of the CAFTA members, we don't see that there's room for that at this moment, and that's quite a big limitation to continue pursuing the modernization of these free trade agreements.
With that in mind, I presume, you tell me, but your president has publicly called for Costa Rica to be the first non-North American country to be welcomed into the USMCA. What would that mean for Costa Rica were that to be an option?
Well, Costa Rica, just as the rest of the members of USMCA, CUSMA or TEMEC, we're an OECD economy as well. One of the only 4 Latin American members of the OECD, and that has brought a big reform process in our country. Our labor and environmental standards are not up only to those of the USMCA members, but those of the OECD members. And we are a critical player and partner in the supply chain on critical sectors as semiconductors. We host the only Intel plant out of the United States in the Americas. On medical devices, 41% of our exports in goods to the world are medical devices from all body parts, And this is quite remarkable. Of course, agriculture still remains very good. We produce very good pineapples and mangoes that would fit perfectly to that sauce. We can add a little bit of pineapple taste and mango and give it that sweet, spicy taste. And I think that we do have a narrative. We do think that Costa Rica can be a wonderful partner for USMCA when the time comes. 50% of our trade is carried with CUSMA partners, USMCA partners. So we do see that there is a logic behind this. Certainly, we have to water that seed, continue watering the seed. There's a political campaign to start here in Washington. We have to see how that fits into the trade fits into the political agenda and the next government in Washington. But certainly, there's Canada, there's Mexico. We're engaging. We just had a wonderful bilateral meeting earlier this morning. We woke up quite early and we discussed, among other things, the possibility of having Costa Rica at some moment in time in USMCA. The same thing happened with the OECD. No one gave a dime about Costa Rica. Mm-hmm. But we persevered. We didn't listen. We continued. We watered that seed, and we're here. We're about to enter into our third year of membership. So why not USMCA?
Which takes us to Senator Cassidy. Senator, you've been a real proponent of trade expansion into the Western Hemisphere, U.S. led. Traditionally, trade expansion has been a bedrock of U.S. policy in the Americas, but it seems to have lost a little bit of luster in Washington in recent years, bipartisan basis. From your perspective, is there a way to restore a sense of the importance, the strategic importance of trade to U.S. interests in the Western Hemisphere?
What a great question, Eric. Let me kind of set the stage a little bit further. I think the United States needs to engage in the Western Hemisphere like it has not in generations. You can argue that it has not been since John F. Kennedy that the United States has had a coherent, consistent, effective Western Hemisphere engagement policy. Now, we see that when the United States engages, it is of incredible benefit to our country. I would argue that the comments about USMCA are an example of that. So if we can promote that trade is not zero-sum, but rather initiates a virtuous cycle in which both sides of the partnership benefit, recognizing that trade can be done in such a way that, frankly, deindustrializes a nation. We cannot do that. But rather something which helps ignite prosperity where otherwise it would not be. We have to make that case. Now, I really like the comments so far. And of course, this is my prism, so you might say it's a prism. But if I look at the irregular immigration that is coming to the United States southern border, it is interesting. There's a woman who worked with me originally from Guatemala, and I once asked her, these folks who are coming here, they're going to live in poverty in the United States. She said, Senator Cassidy, however they're living in the United States is better than how they were living in Guatemala. And she spoke of that as a Guatemalan. And I know that whenever there's some sort of economic dislocation in Central America, there's another wave of irregular immigration coming to the United States. So what if we had a trade policy which would create prosperity in the Central American countries to the order that it was more resilient to natural disaster or to a fungus on coffee trees, that would keep people in their hometown as opposed to embarking on a dangerous trip? We know that works because net migration from Mexico has plummeted since USMCA. And so I think that there's ways that you can say directly that trade helps, creating prosperity for all. Indirectly, it helps the United States, because I'm just trying to promote this among my fellow North Americans, that indirectly it helps by creating economic stability in a land which, if we don't have economic stability, unleashes problems. And then the third level I would think it would help is that the United States has somewhat of a fear about China attempting to undermine the influence of Western values around the world. Whenever there is lack of prosperity, people tend to look to other means by which to promote prosperity. When I look at IMF numbers for prosperity going forward, it doesn't look very good. So if we can also say by creating this Western Hemispheric prosperity, we make countries less likely to turn to China with what we feel is a negative overall agenda, and instead to embrace Western values, that's a third positive, if you will. So I'm trying to promote it in a variety of ways.
I want to pick up on your comment on China, because the one area where you can actually get agreement in Washington these days seems to be on China. And it's a broad issue in terms of the overall U.S. foreign policy. You know, I've said oftentimes that China's entry into the Western Hemisphere is the most dramatic shift this century for the hemisphere. That has been what, I mean, there have been other changes as well, but that's been the most dramatic. I'm not sure that the United States has fully grasped what's happening in the region. And I wonder, from the trade policy agenda, is there a way to suggest, both in Congress but also more broadly to the American people, this is a strategic shift in the Western Hemisphere. The United States is losing out to opportunities. What can we do to promote a greater engagement in the region from the private sector perspective, from the public sector perspective, but to meet those needs, Senator, that you just so eloquently articulated in terms of economic growth and the environment and so many other things? How can we promote that type of engagement in the region, even as China is very actively doing the same thing?
First, I love the way you use the word we. I just had colleagues who went to Argentina, and my Argentines did a wonderful job of convincing them of the need for further U.S. engagement. Now, as it turns out, with my assistant over there, Joel Hirsch, we're advancing something called the Americas Act. And the Americas Act has 3 pillars. It is trade, investment, and people to people. And so I've since taken this concept to my colleagues and said, listen, this is a good bill. We've got bipartisan support, and I see that support growing. The second thing that my office is working on is a carbon border adjustment mechanism in which we would have the ability for countries to join into a carbon club in which that would benefit those who tend to have higher environmental standards. It would promote the idea that if Costa Rica is doing well with its environmental standards, it would be rewarded for that in terms of trade access. And by the carbon border adjustment mechanism, it would effectively attach a fee to the externality of carbon pollution entering the atmosphere, no matter where it is entering the atmosphere. I can elaborate on any of those, and you'll probably tell me, we only got 40 minutes and we only got 30 minutes left. But our people-to-people, our investment, and our trade policy, we're very excited about, and we think has an avenue towards every country becoming a member of USMCA that wish to embrace, not just Costa Rica, but to join the others. Every country joining that in a way which the countries that are currently in the USMCA say, my gosh, isn't it good that other countries are joining?
I mean, that's a powerful vision. And I'm glad that you went that direction in terms of answering the question and giving us a sense of what the Americas Act is all about. I would like to come back to that, but let's bring Minister Ng back into the conversation. Minister, I teased it earlier about Canada's broader trade ambitions. You are very active in the Asia Pacific, and appropriately so from my perspective, obviously with Europe, et cetera. I wonder if you could give us a sense of whether CPTPP or whether Canada has ambitions on IPEF or APEP or all the things that trade wonks know what I'm talking about, if you could give a sense of what are your trade priorities looking forward beyond USMCA.
Yeah, absolutely. In Canada, we pride ourselves as the only G7 country with a free trade agreement with every other G7 country. We have access, of course, here in North America through the USMCA or CUSMA. In Europe, we have access to the European Union through our agreement with them in CETA, and in the Asia Pacific, market access with the countries that form part of CPTPP, and then a number of bilateral agreements. Of course, we have one with Costa Rica and with others in Latin America. But what does this mean? It means that we have access to about 65% of the world's economy through trade architecture at present. We released our Indo-Pacific strategy last year, at the end of the year in November, and building on CPTPP to also negotiate with the countries that form the ASEAN. And a direct bilateral agreement. We're at the negotiating table with Indonesia, and I'm doing something with India as well. Canada is a trading nation. 1 out of 6 jobs is dependent on trade. 2/3 of our economy is dependent on trade. We are a vast country geographically, but we're like the size of California. In people, in population. So trade really does matter. Trade rules really matter. And how we trade and build that resiliency really also matters. And we saw the vulnerabilities during the pandemic of restrictions coming up, or not being able to rely on, on supplies, goods, medicines, etc. And we have to learn from those lessons. But for trade in Canada, it really is about being able to open up. It's about being able to open up market access, but to the point that I think both the senator and the minister also said, trade has to benefit everyone in your economy. In Canada, I lead the women's entrepreneurship strategy. The Prime Minister gave me a target, which is to double the number of female entrepreneurs in our country. But the analogy I would use is this: if you're playing a sports game and you've got a team, why would you play with 50% of the team on the bench? So, and trade agreements and the inclusive provisions in trade, standards for labor and for workers so that they are paid fairly, opportunities for small and medium-sized businesses to get into those value chains. And now you are looking at value chains and supply chains that are around the world. You have the fastest growing region in the world, in the Indo-Pacific. It is going to be the world's largest middle class by somewhere, I think, in the order of like 2035. I don't have it specifically, but somewhere in that region, but that's not that far away. But being able to build on trade agreements, the architecture that is there, having standards for the environment, so that we are creating incentives to to trade, to be inclusive, and to deal with wages for workers and good environmental practices, is really sort of where Canada's outlook on how we approach trade.
Thank you very much. I'd love to come back to you. I'm not sure we're going to have time to, but there are several things you've said. I think you've really hit on a lot of important topics. Thank you for that. Minister Tovar, let's come back to you. Minister Eng has mentioned several times supply chains, and that is clearly something that, from at least a Washington perspective, we see Central America as a huge opportunity. And yet, maybe the opportunity isn't being fully realized. And I wonder, from the Costa Rican perspective, and recognizing Costa Rica doesn't speak for all of Central America, but what could be done, whether it's from trade agreements perspective, maybe linking Costa Rica into the CPTPP or the Asia Pacific, or something with USMCA, as we've talked about, or maybe it's just improving business conditions somehow, or changing regulations or something. What could be done from your perspective to help make the countries of the region more attractive from a supply chain perspective, so that the private sector audience that we're talking to will say, this isn't just a theory, this is something that we actually have to and want to do because it makes sense for our business. Are those conversations happening, and what advice might you give to us?
I would say both.
Yeah.
I mean, in order to make of yourself, of your country, a critical player, stakeholder in the supply chain, global supply chain, you have to work domestically, pursuing reforms, but also best practices and policies, but also opening up, expanding your trade platform. And that's what we're doing. We just recently, just a couple of weeks ago, I see the ambassador here, we just signed our free trade agreement with Ecuador. We're pursuing to also join the CPTPP. We're on an earlier stage of interaction on exchange of information. I just flew back about a month ago from the Gulf countries in the Middle East, where we launched trade talks with Israel, a fundamental player, economy, and the UAE. So we continue expanding ourselves at the same time as we continue pursuing domestic reforms, doing our share of work to continue placing Costa Rica as an active and critical player in the supply chain. Mind you that in Central America, we're very different. I mean, we might share in the same geographical space, but we, all of us as members, we have our own challenges, our own strengths and opportunities, and our own interests. When it comes to Costa Rica, as I mentioned, medical devices, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, that's where we're aiming at, because that's what we do. That's what we do better. Of course, agro-industry is another area that we're very strong. But we have launched recently a dialogue on supply chains within this initiative that to some of you might not be well known yet, which is the Alliance for Development in Democracy, where you have Ecuador, Dominican Republic, Panama, and Costa Rica engaging in a straightforward dialogue with the United States to identify business opportunities on the supply chain side, to work together and make of our countries, which, if you look around, is a set of countries that share the same values. We have we have some sort of like-mindedness that will make the U.S. economy and the U.S. authorities and business people really comfortable when dealing with us. So we have this sort of initiatives ongoing, this sort of dialogues, but also on the bilateral basis, Costa Rica is already well placed in the supply chain with the U.S. and on the sectors that I just mentioned.
Thank you very much. And again, I'd love to come back to some of these things. I think with only 5 minutes remaining, we may not have that opportunity, but Senator Cassidy, to you, I want to ask a question that there's already been a lot of corridor chatter about this morning, but it's really a topic in terms of the trade policy community, and that is that the direction of trade policy, and we've already heard it in terms of discussion of all four of us today, in terms of some of the other issues of trade, in terms of the environment, in terms of labor, in terms of small businesses, all of these very, very important things. We're not hearing about tariff relief or market access. This is a business audience, and I wonder from the perspective of the U.S. Senate, where do these issues fit? I mean, is this something that we're just in a new era of trade and we're not talking about market access anymore? Or is this still the primary driver of trade policy, or should it be, in the context going forward? It's an open-ended question, but my point is that, there seems to sometimes be a disconnect in terms of what countries may be asking for and what they're receiving.
So let me make sure I understand it. You're asking what should be the primary focus as we pursue policy?
Is trade, well, yes, but is market access still a thing? I mean, is that still something we should be using as the top priority for trade policy, or is that one of several priorities at this point that should be pursued?
Well, you got to have a primary variable, and I think market access is primary variable. I think what we've learned, as Mary said, is you can't sacrifice everything for market access. But that said, there's some ways to go about it. You opened up by asking Minister Tovar about CAFTA, and perhaps it's not lived up to what it should be. But CAFTA is kind of a hub and spokes. The United States, you have market access to the United States, but not to each other. And so if we could bolt on to USMCA, the beauty of USMCA is that Mexico and Canada have market access to each other, and the United States has market access to each. So if you could take Costa Rica and bolt it on to USMCA, it would not just be market access to the United States, but it would be market access to all three. And that's the power of it. And of course, if we're speaking about a domestic content requirement, let's imagine that the CAFTA countries were all bolted on to USMCA. Well, then trade between each other would, of course, be facilitated. But trade from El Salvador to Honduras to Costa Rica would all serve as domestic content if they wish to enter into one of the other countries. So I think there's a lot of things to go there. One other thing I would like to mention, though, as well. One thing that I have found to be a concern when I speak to the business community about investing in different countries is the level of corruption. I think there needs to be fresh thinking about how we address that. One of the things that we have in our bill is an e-governance platform that the United States would help promote. And in the e-governance platform, those things which would normally require a permit, instead of having to go and wait in line and perhaps given a consideration to the person who stamps the form, it would all be done online. So now if Walmart wished to go and invest and build stores in another country, they could see if their vendors had registered with the government and were paying taxes. And they would not be held accountable or liable had the vendor lied and they had not actually been doing so. This will have the effect of incentivizing more companies to enter the formal economy, makes it easier. They enter the formal economy. They're more likely to pay taxes to the central government. The central government has more money to invest in human capital and in physical infrastructure. And that creates that virtuous cycle, which attracts more foreign direct investment because you've made the investment in the human capital and the physical infrastructure. So we also think that the e-governance aspect of it facilitates market access. It doesn't matter if you have market access if people don't want to go there. It has to be kind of like, oh, we want to go there because there's human capital, there's rule of law, there's physical infrastructure, and we have market access. So I don't think you can totally separate the one from the other. You've got to have a strategy for each. But But the primary variable, yes, we want market access.
I gave you a straw man, and you effectively destroyed it. So thank you thank you for doing that. Regrettably, I do think this is the time that we have for this really outstanding panel, and we had two visitors travel from far outside of Washington just specifically to join us this morning. But I do want to just say thank you to all of you for your terrific comments, for getting us going in such a thoughtful way. And I would like to ask all of you, please, to join me in thanking our panel for their terrific comments this morning.